I'd love to train you up as an MOT tester, but it's a very time-consuming business. Every tester I have takes up a lot of my time, supervising, monitoring and generally supporting them. And the thing is, well, what with the cost of running this business and the economic situation and having to deal with the customers, it's just not a viable proposition. I just haven't got enough time to devote to another tester. Come back and see me in a couple of months' time. Perhaps it'll be a little bit less hectic then. OK?
OK, boss.
Right, better get started on that Mondeo now. Blimey. Dave is an MOT tester, but he can't even spell the word MOT. Oh, I'm not going to waste my time training him up.
I bet he'd make a good tester. You'd have more time to support him if you didn't spend so much time on the golf course.
Aren't those invoices ready yet?
Well, what did he say?
Hasn't got the time and money, apparently.
Typical. He just can't be bothered and he doesn't want to pay you any extra.
Well, I've got to see him again in a few months.
Well, we all know what that means, don't we? Never mind, it's Friday. No more work for 2 whole days.
Yeah.
Hasn't Phil phoned in yet?
Nope.
Oh, I don't know. Monday morning and one of my only 2 testers decides not to turn up. Derek can't cope out there. He's got MOTs backed up. Can't he come in like everybody else?
Morning, sir.
Morning, boss. 6 lucky numbers or what? I just stopped by to say I won't be doing any more testing for you. You can stick your job up your driver to the airport.
How are we going to cope? Oh, get me a tester!
Hello, VI. How do I go about getting a tester put on, and how soon can it be done?
This authorised examiner has a problem and VI will help. But the truth is, testing is a responsible job that requires qualifications and expertise, which means new testers aren't necessarily available off the shelf at a moment's notice. This edition of MOT Matters follows the road to becoming a tester for motorbike and car mechanics and the surrounding issues for authorised examiners. I'm going to meet some of the VI people who look after the process of bringing on new nominated testers.
Testing is a very responsible job and testers need to be able to take that responsibility seriously. They also need to have the sort of experience for the types of vehicle they're going to be testing.
So who can be a nominated tester then?
There's various criteria that they need to comply with.
First, they need to be at least 20 years old and sponsored by a vehicle testing station. They'll also need a full UK driving licence for manual and automatic for the classes of vehicle they want to test. They need to be a skilled mechanic with at least 4 years' experience, have no unspent convictions for criminal offences connected with the vehicle testing scheme or the motor trade, or involving acts of violence or intimidation, and be otherwise of good repute. And finally, they need to have passed the nominated tester training and, if necessary, the NTT assessment.
Fiona, what sort of experience is acceptable during those 4 years? Is it OK to be a fitter or do you have to be a mechanic or a technician?
Job title isn't important. What we actually look for is a person's experience, and that's what they need to tell us on their application form. When they're filling in the application, if they actually detail all their experience, the work that they've actually done, we can then make that assessment and judge their capability at that stage.
Now, can unemployed people become testers?
Yeah, as long as they've been nominated by the Authorised Examiner.
Now, must the tester be in full-time employment at the VTS?
Not necessarily. What needs to happen is that they need to be included on the VT26, which is a list of nominated testers, which is shown on the MOT notice board.
Now, how many testers can you have, or indeed should you have?
As many as you like, really, but realistically, it's going to match the volume of testing that's actually being carried out. The issue that people need to bear in mind is that they need to be aware of the quality control requirement, which stipulates that a live test has to be carried out once a month, and that needs to be recorded in the register.
Can a tester be included on the VT26 for more than one vehicle testing station?
Yeah, the tester or the quality controller can be included on several VT26s, but the tester has to be QC'd at each of the testing stations that they work at.
Now, what happens when the nominated tester, in effect, changes jobs from one vehicle testing station to another?
They need to tell us. If somebody leaves, then the authorised examiner needs to contact the local area office and actually tell them that the person's no longer working there. If they're looking to recruit an additional tester, again they need to contact the local area office and actually ask them to verify the acceptability of that tester. But to enable them to do that, they will actually need details of the tester's driving licence.
Now, what happens when a tester tests for one class and, say, wants to go on and test for another?
If people are Class 4 testers, they can go on and do Class 7 testing as long as the garage is actually authorised to carry out Class 7s. What people can't do is actually jump from motorcycles to cars or vice versa, unless they've got the experience to actually do that.
What about keeping the VT26 up to date on the notice board?
They need to tell us again. If there are changes, then they need to make sure that they're notifying their local area office as soon as possible so that we can then issue them with a new VT26 that's up to date.
OK, that's fair enough. Now, what about testers who, say, have not been testing for quite some time? What would you suggest there?
Depends how long they haven't been testing for. If it's over 5 years that they haven't been testing, then we treat them as if they were a new tester. If it's between 2 years and 5 years, they actually have to attend the nominated tester refresher course and carry out a demo test. If it's between 6 months and 2 years, then they need to just do the demo test. And if it's within the 6 months, then pretty much we'll actually agree to let them carry on testing.
OK, what about a tester, say, returning to testing after something like a disciplinary action?
Again, this is if they were testing for over 5 years, so we would treat them as if they were a new tester. The only thing to bear in mind there is that if they don't hold the qualification, they will actually need to go through the NTT assessment again.
Well, we'll be talking about that a little later on in some detail, but I'm sure there are some forms to fill in at this point.
The one that they need to fill in is the application form, the VT78. That needs to be completed by the AE and also by the nominated tester. They're available from the training centre in Bristol. They're also available from Swansea, the address of which are both in the guide. And when computerisation happens, then you will actually be able to access them online.
OK, so where does the AE send those completed forms to?
That needs to come back to the training centre in Bristol.
OK, anything special about filling out those forms? Anything complicated?
Not at all, no. Just make sure you read the application form. There are guidance notes that we include in it which walk you through every stage of it. So if people read those, then they won't have any problems with it at all. One thing to spell out, though, is that we don't actually accept faxes of the forms, so they need to be the originals.
Fiona, what happens if potential testers don't have what are deemed to be the correct qualifications?
If they don't have the qualifications, then they need to pass the NTT-A, which is the assessment. Once they've passed that assessment, or if they do have the qualifications, that's when they can go on to do the NTT2.
Right, so what are those correct qualifications then?
OK, there's a range of them that they could have.
There's the National Craft Certificate in Vehicle Maintenance and Electronic Systems. There's a number of different city and guilds, 7 different categories they can choose from here. The BTEC Motor Vehicle Engineering Studies National Certificate, or ONC. The ScotVec National Certificate in Vehicle Mechanics and Systems, Part 3. An NVQ or SVQ in Vehicle Mechanical and Electronic Systems, Maintenance and Repair, Level 3.
What about qualifications that don't appear on that list that you've just mentioned that potential testers might think are acceptable?
OK, if people think that they've got qualifications which are of equivalent or higher level, then they need to include those with their application form, send them down to Bristol so that we can have a look at them. If they're sending us diplomas, then we need to make sure they send us all the components so that we can actually have a look at those as well.
Now, how would you view unit credit certificates being sent in rather than the final certificate itself?
That causes us big problems. We actually need the full certificate. We can't accept the unit credits.
Now, certificates, do you need the originals or will copies do?
Copies are fine, but we do check those regularly as we do the driving licence.
Now, driving licences, they must be current, mustn't they?
They do need to be current. They also need to be signed by the individual, and they need to include all the classes of vehicle that they're going to be testing. Equally, people need to make sure that they do actually take their driving licence with them to each stage of the process.
OK, what about non-UK licences?
They're OK as long as the person hasn't been in the country for more than 12 months.
Now, I believe that some people have actually been on the NTTA when they've had the relevant qualifications the whole time.
Unfortunately, yes. If people don't actually send through their qualifications, then we can't make that assessment. So it's imperative that they do actually include all their certificates.
What about people with overseas qualifications?
We need to have a look at them. So they either need to phone us or send them to us, and then we can actually verify them then.
So if people don't have those relevant qualifications, they need to take the assessment. How do they find out where that is and when it is?
They need to contact their local area office. Their area office will then be able to give them details about how they proceed.
The NTTA is a 1.5 hour long multiple choice questionnaire which is sat in your local area office.
The NTTA is a paper assessment. It's about testing the depth of knowledge and ultimately about raising the standard of testers.
So does this mean that testers actually have to learn the inspection manual?
Not necessarily, no. The NTTA is not about the MOT test. It's about technical knowledge.
So what happens if a person fails the NTTA?
Failing the NTTA means you have to wait for a period of 4 months. But this period can be reduced if you undertake suitable training. One of the options would be to attend a Vehicle Inspectorate basic technology course.
And what would happen, say, if the person failed on the second attempt?
Failing the NTTA for a second time would mean that the candidate would have to wait for a period of 2 years before resitting the exam. That would be 2 years from the very first assessment.
Oh, 2 years, that's actually quite a long time. Why is that?
At this stage, Vehicle Inspectorate consider the candidate needs a longer period of time to expand on their existing knowledge and gain more experience.
Now, Jo, why is it possible to score a lower mark on the second NTTA paper?
There's actually 2 reasons for this. The first reason is that it is a multiple choice question paper and there can be a certain element of guesswork in there. The second reason is that no candidate would ever sit the same paper twice.
Jo, where could you get an idea of the kind of questions that might be asked for this paper?
Vehicle Inspectorate publish example copies of their question papers on the website.
How difficult is it? Do you think I could pass it?
Why don't we go and have a look and see if you can pass the NTTA?
I'm not sure that's a good idea, but I will give it a go, OK?
Here we are, Claire.
Thank you, I think.
Now you have an hour and a half in which to complete the paper. There we go, Claire. Time's up.
So, Jo, how did I do then?
Well, Claire, considering you don't work in a garage, you've actually done extremely well. But you haven't actually passed.
So basically I shouldn't give up the day job then? Yeah. Well, in all seriousness, I could actually redo this test, couldn't I, within the 4-month period? If I did the basic technology course, is that right? Can you tell me all about that? What does that entail?
It actually consists of 5 one-day training modules with brakes, steering and suspension, wheels, tyres, electrics and lighting, exhausts, emissions and general items, and lastly, body and corrosion. And you can actually take any or all 5 of these modules depending on obviously which areas you failed the test and the areas you feel you need training in.
So what are the aims of this particular course then?
It's about improving your basic understanding of motor vehicle technology, whilst also topping up your existing knowledge. What it isn't intended to do is to turn, say, an inexperienced person into a motor mechanic.
So from what you're saying, it wouldn't necessarily guarantee me a pass to do this, would it?
Certainly wouldn't. A student may find that they need a longer period of time to improve their existing knowledge and to actually gain more experience.
Well, having passed the NTTA, or armed with those appropriate qualifications, we get to the 2-day NTT2, which is held at VI's principal training centres in Bristol and Manchester, as well as some others around the country.
The NTT2 is designed to explain to candidates the workings of the guide and the manual. During the 2 days, candidates will be involved in classroom-based learning and also practical demonstration, and at the end of the 2 days they'll have to complete a test paper which they need to pass.
Now, presumably preparation for this test is quite important.
It's essential, yes, and unfortunately it's not always done sufficiently. It's the AE's responsibility to make sure that they've prepared the tester fully before they come along to the NTT2. And that can be done in a number of different ways, familiarising them with the procedures, with the equipment or with the manual.
How important is the quality controller in this process?
The quality controller or another nominated tester can actually help to coach and mentor the tester.
So, Fiona, can training take place on these live tests?
No, because they're not actually able to issue test certificates as yet, then they can't take place on the live tests.
So tell me about this test then for the NTT2.
Okay, it's a 20-question multiple choice paper based on the guide and the manual, which they will be able to use during the test.
The final hurdle in the process is a practical assessment held at the sponsoring test station.
This is done by the vehicle examiner who watches the demonstration test.
When you say watches the demonstration test, I should imagine that's quite stressful for the tester.
Yeah, and we realise this. Some people get very anxious, and the vehicle examiner will try to make them feel at ease.
So what advice would VI give to a tester in order that they should pass the test?
Oh, that's simple. They must be well prepared.
Now, how is this practical assessment marked, so to speak?
The scoring system's contained in the guide. So, for example, if they scored no more than 9 points, they would have been successful.
Now, what happens if they're not successful and they fail?
Well, if we think more about the information in the guide, so if they scored between 10 and 19 points, they may have the opportunity to reattempt their demonstration test, but that's up to the discretion of the vehicle examiner. We may want them to reattend the initial training course. Now, if they scored 20 points or more, they'll have to go through the process again, having waited a period of 2 months. If after this they're unsuccessful, then they would have to go through the process again, having waited a period of 2 years from the date of the initial training course.
This practical assessment, it's not a training session by VI, is it?
No, it's not, but when they're successful, it may be that the vehicle examiner might want to give them some advice.
Now, having passed the NTT2 test, some testers apply to do the practical assessment too soon, don't they?
Yeah, some are very keen. If you consider it takes a little while for the course paperwork to come through to the local area office, for example, we would expect them to utilise that time, to practice their demonstration test. They're not doing themselves any favours by contacting VI too soon. By the same token, they shouldn't leave it too long. They should deal with it when it's fresh in their mind.
When you mention practice, I suppose that's quite useful, isn't it?
I have to say, practice is essential.
By now, you'd expect the testers to be very familiar with how to use the manual, wouldn't you?
Yes, they do need to know how to use the manual. They also need to know how to use the equipment. If they're uncertain, obviously they can ask their colleagues, but there's manufacturers' instruction booklets. When they feel confident with this, that's the best time to contact Vehicle Inspectorate to say they're ready.
Right, now, different issue, bikes.
Yeah, and different is the word. We don't require them to have technical qualifications, so the NTTA exam doesn't apply. It's a one-day course, but they still have to demonstrate their ability to test a machine effectively at the sponsor's test station, and that they must pass.
So, Fiona, the issues concerning potential testers, how do VI view situations like disability and literacy?
Well, no two cases are the same, and we would take each case on its own merit. In situations like that, then we would actually ask the AE to contact their local area office.
OK, now will computerisation make any impact?
With computerisation, procedures will be simplified.
Now, a tester's going to need any computerisation skills?
No IT training is required. As long as they can switch the computer on and they can use a keyboard, that's all they need.
What about this scenario? Say a tester is nominated, but is really not that happy with the responsibility, but can't quite pluck up the courage to say no to the boss.
Testing is actually a very responsible job, and people need to be willing to take on that responsibility. If they're not, then they're not the people that should actually be nominated. So in a situation like that, I'd advise a tester to go back to their AE and talk things through with them and actually ask that they aren't nominated.
OK, what happens if the authorised examiner is unsure of that tester's ability? What would you suggest?
The authorised examiner needs to be sure. They need to have confidence in the tester's ability, And if at any stage they're not confident in that, then they need to actually stop the tester testing at their station.
Fiona, it's a really serious decision for someone who wants to become a nominated tester, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. The AE needs to consider carefully the calibre of the person that are actually nominating, and indeed whether or not the individual actually wants to take on that responsibility. The question that they really need to be asking themselves is this the right person to be doing this job? And luckily for us, most of our candidates are.
Of course, I'd love to have you as an MOT tester, but it's such a time-consuming business. Every tester I have takes up such a lot of my time, monitoring, supporting and generally looking after. The thing is, what with the cost of running this business, the economic situation and dealing with the customers, I haven't enough time to devote to another tester. Come back in another couple of months. Perhaps it'll be less hectic then and, well, best of luck.
Hi Phil, how'd you get on?
No chance. Says he's just too busy.
Oh, well, you know what it's like.
How can anyone blow so much money in such a short time? Well, if he thinks I'm taking him back, he's got another think coming. I haven't got time to look after any more testers. Oh, I'm late as it is. I've got to go to a meeting.
Balls. Don't forget these.
Thank you so much.
For more information and to get an application form, contact VI Training Services at this address and telephone number, or log on to VI's website.